Hi, it's Sandra here from Creating Spain, and when I'm filming this, it's actually a Sunday morning in September, but this probably won't go out until December, I think, because I do film in advance. What I have is a piece of pretty cheap cardstock. Now, I happen to know that this cardstock does not take to water well at all. It sort of swells up, it gets a funny texture on the front, it's not particularly nice. So what I've done is I have taken it outside and I've given it a quick spray with some clear varnish, which should, in theory, have sealed it and therefore stop the water damage. I have here a stencil which I've cut out of acetate. You probably can't see it too well, but it's a Holly Wreath. As it happens, it's cut to A5, the same size as the card, which is quite convenient. The other thing which is quite convenient is it's slightly static, so I shouldn't need anything underneath it to actually keep the stencil in place or to stop things from going underneath it. Now, generally with Holly Wreath designs, they're done in silver or gold or green, etc. I'm going to change it up a bit. I want to go for very cold colours. And I also want to add some texture and a bit of bling to it. So, yeah, we shall see. We shall see how it works. Right, I've got a piece of glass here that I use. It's an old coaster that I took the colouring from. And I use that as my colour palette. I have an ink blender. And because a lot of people do have them to hand, I decided to go ahead and use ink pads. Now, I've got mini ones. If you've got full-size ones, fine. Now, this is a very pale blue. It's so pale that you can probably barely see it. I can barely see it. Just about see it if I put my hand underneath. Now, normally when I do this particular technique, I usually use glycerin on my ink blender. I'm not doing that now because this has got varnish over the top. Shouldn't actually need it. It should, in theory, glide, I think. So let's see how it does. Oh, really well, apparently. Okay, so I'm quite surprised how much colour that's picked up. It's done quite nicely. So I'm going to do another little tap of that. I'm just sort of going round in random places. I'm not really paying too much attention to where it's going, just so long as it's getting some coverage somewhere. So I want to bring the changes a bit with the colour. Now this one is much deeper, so I'm going to have to go quite gently with it, or I'll end up with far too much colour. It's looking good. I'm quite happy. Right. And the other one that I want to use, I better wipe that off, so I've still got some colour on there, is a grey, which is, this one's London Fog. It's not a really dark colour, so it should, in theory, be fine. Yeah. That's doing what I want it to do, pretty much. Add a little more of that, I think. I'm going to add more colour than I might if I was leaving this entirely au naturel, as it were. I think that's as much as I want to put on there for that. Okay, so the next thing I've got is a texture paste. Now this is 3D Deluxe, which I got from Lidl. It looks like a plain texture when you open it up, but it's actually slightly glittery, glitzy. Don't know quite how you term it. You can't see this until you actually put it down and it dries. So yeah, I'm going to see what happens with this stuff, because I think it could be an interesting effect, and just give this little, just tiny amount of wintry sparkle, if you like, to the whole thing. Now I like these things in pots because if you get too much on your spatula or whatever, you can scrape it off and back into the pot. It's quite handy. But I won't do that with this because it's probably going to have picked up some of the ink below, and I don't want to obviously stain what I've got. So I'm just going to take off the excess, like so. Yeah, it has picked up some of the blue. So I shall have to wait and see what happens. I'm going to remove the stencil, then I'm going to put it directly into some water. Oh, pretty, I like. So I'll come back in a few minutes and do some more work, but this needs to dry first. Right, this is an example of what happens if you try doing the same thing with a card stencil and card underneath it which has not been protected by the varnish. As you can see, it wrinkles. There's also areas on here where something has seeped underneath and it's ripped the surface of the card up. So that's why I put the varnish on underneath. Okay, for this version, I think we've already decided that I'm not going for realism because I was going for pale blues and things, which you generally wouldn't use for Holly. So I happen to have some petrol blue stones here that I think will look quite nice as little holly berries. Okay, so here is my finished holly wreath. Now you notice it's got some baubles on it. I have a bauble stamp which I have used, but the reason I used it, and I'll show you, if you look at this one, that looks like it's sort of like a circular wreath. Now, when I put the little holly berries on, if you look at the shape that the holly berries are in, even though I put them where they need to go, they don't look like they're in a circular fashion, and it made the wreath look decidedly peculiar. So I decided it had to be evened up somehow, and I've used the stamps. Now I've stamped it in two different colours. I used the pale one and the darker blue, the teal and the summer sky. I think that looks quite nice, so I'm going to cut that down to size and make the sentiment and finish it off. So what I'm going to do for this one, I'm actually going to take my little baubles and I'm just going to stamp on there in the colour of choice. And my colour of choice, I believe, is going to be Love Letter. So I'm going to use that and just randomly stamp them. So I'm going to go around and try and make it so that they are placed in a circular fashion. So if you can see on this one at the moment, I have sparkly leaves, but I don't have sparkle on my berries. And if I want to do that, the way of doing that obviously is to go over it with glossy accents or to stamp it and heat emboss. But I don't want to use heat embossing because this acrylic texture paste really doesn't take too kindly to being heated and it's likely to bubble up. This is the finished card. So after I put the beads on and did the baubles, I added a stamp sentiment which I stamped in white on navy cardstock, and I added a two-layered bow. It's very easy to make a two-layer bow. You simply cut two lengths of ribbon, put one over the other, and then make your bow as normal. So there we go. You can see one is actually a very pale blue ribbon and the other one is silver, but it's a very, very pale blue organza, so it only just registers as blue. But it's a very classic looking, very clean looking Christmas card. You could bling it up more if you wanted to, but because of the nature of the glittery sort of texture paste in there, I like to leave it relatively plain. Now I've not included the file for this because, to be honest, Most people, if they're making cards, have probably got a Holly Wreath or something similar that they can use. And it's just to show you that you don't have to stick to just plain straightforward paint. A little bit of texture paste, in this case a glimmery one, makes a big difference. But if you're going to use one of these texture pastes, do pay attention to the card that you're adding it to, and do a test first. Just take a bit of your paste and put it on a little piece of card in the corner, just to see whether it actually affects the card or not, because if it does, you're going to really hate it when you've taken the effort to do your stencil, get all your paste on, and then suddenly find, oh, it's warped the card. Not such a fun thing to find. Oh, the other thing I did was I took one of the paint pads, the darker ones, and I just ran it along the edge just to add a little bit of definition, because it is white on white. But that's it, a relatively easy card to do. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.